Hello, today we're going to talk about Saturn. So I'm just going to go over some basic features about Saturn and some of the more interesting things. One of the things that is important to know about Saturn is that it's one of the gas giants. So the outer planets of the solar systems are the gas giants. So Saturn is one of the huge gas giant planets. And it's very large. It's only the only planet that's bigger than Saturn is Jupiter. So it is second only to Jupiter in size. Now, the most obvious thing about Saturn, though, are the rings that we see around Saturn. And you can see these in a telescope. So Saturn's most spectacular feature are its rings. You can see in all these images that there's different colors and different shapes on some of the rings. So there's multiple rings here that you see. Now, the main rings, though, the three primary and largest rings are the A, B, and C rings. So those are the ones that are the most easily visible. But there's lots of other rings, actually, smaller, that have different compositions. Okay, let's continue. So when we look at the rings, we see, they're huge. Saturn's a big planet and the rings go around Saturn. But for how large they are, they're actually very, very thin. Only, a few meters to maybe 20 meters thick as it orbits around the planet. So this is an artist's representation, and it's not a bad one. Very thin rings, scattering of ice and rock and dust, mainly ice, mixed in with some rock, similar to comets. So the rings are very thin compared to how much space they take up. And the total mass of the rings would only make up a very small moon. So even though the rings are huge, the amount of rock in them is actually very, very small if you put it all together. All right, let's go down here. So one of the questions that comes up is, how did these rings form? And the rings of Saturn were not always present. They happen to be present now, but they haven't always been there. And what scientists think, what we believe, is that it was former moons that got too close to Saturn and started getting ripped apart. So most of the evidence suggests that the rings were former moons that were ripped apart by Saturn's gravity. So as they get closer to Saturn, Saturn's high gravity starts to deform and misshape them, and it literally starts to break apart the small moons, and that becomes the rings that we see. All right, let's talk about an extra ring, not one of the A, B, and C rings. This is a different ring. This is further out from those ones. So it's further away from Saturn. And you see this ring here, and it kind of looks hazy. It looks a little different than the other rings. And in this image, right in the middle here, there's this dot, and that is a moon. So there's this moon that's going right through this ring. And we're gonna find that the moon and the ring are connected. So there are many smaller rings as well. The E ring, so this one's called the E ring, is different from the other rings, however. The planet that's going through it, the moon that's going through it, is Enceladus. And you can see this is an actual image from satellites, so is this one, showing Enceladus. And you can see on the surface, it looks like there's these geysers or something that's spraying out of Enceladus. So the small moon Enceladus is responsible for the E-ring. It is constantly venting water and ice crystals into space. So all of this water and ice that gets ejected from Enceladus is actually what makes up this E-ring, the small particles of ice and then water as it freezes. All right, hope this helps.